All right, Larry Kruger here for the Krug Show, talking a little bit about the newest news of the day in 49er land, and that is that the Niners have hired Steve Wilks as their new defensive coordinator, replacing D'Amico Ryans. All right, I like this hire. I like this hire a lot. This is a guy who's very experienced. Steve Wilks, for those people who don't know, he's a 53-year-old football coach who, he's played his college ball at App State. He was a defensive back and has really coached for a long time. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was a defensive coordinator in college, then worked at Savannah State and became the defensive coordinator there. Illinois State, App State, East Tennessee State, Bowling Green, coached at Notre Dame as a defensive backfield coach, and then he went to the NFL with Ron Rivera, coached Washington, coached in Chicago, defensive secondary coach of the Bears, secondary coach of the Chargers, then defensive back coach with Carolina, assistant head coach and DB coach there at Carolina, and then eventually became the assistant head coach and defensive coordinator. Became the Arizona Cardinals head coach in 2018. And actually, his first victory as a coach came against the 49ers. It was week 5 of the 2018 season. That was his first victory as a head coach in the NFL. It came against Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers. So Wilks is respected. He's a 2-time NFC champion with the Bears in 2006 and then again with the Panthers in 2015. Went on and helped those teams go to the Super Bowl, wind up losing the Super Bowl on both occasions. But you're talking about a guy who really knows defense top to bottom. As I said, he was a defensive back in the late 80s, early 90s at Appalachian State. He played 1 year in the Arena Football League with Charlotte as a wide receiver and defensive back and a kick returner. And, an interesting guy. He's married. He has 2 daughters and 1 son. As far as scheme fit, a lot of people wanted Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio, I think, pretty much would have installed a 3-4 defense because historically that's what Vic likes to run. Wilks ran a 4-3 front in Carolina, so he's a great fit. And his at Carolina, at least, he was a blitz happy defense that he ran. The Panthers had the second highest blitz rate of any team in the NFL the year that they went to the Super Bowl, and they blitz 44% of the time. So, he'll mix in a lot of blitzes. It depends what kind of personnel he has. What I really like about this one is, they lock up Chris Kocurek. So Kocurek is there as the defensive line coach. So he's got the front covered. So you really need somebody with some expertise on the back end. And that's where Steve Wilks really comes into play. And he fits with what the Niners want to do. They don't want to run a 3-4. They have 4-3 wide 9 personnel up front, and they don't want to switch that. And so I think this enables them to keep their defense, bring in an experienced guy, a leader of men. And this is a guy who has very much the same kinds of leanings that they've had recently with D'Amico Ryans. Why do I say that? Well, D'Amico with their wide 9 front. What if you had to describe the 49er front? How would you describe it? It's an aggressive single gap, get up the field defense. And that's exactly what Wilks has done in the NFL. He coaches an aggressive single gap 4-3 defense with an emphasis on blitz. And then he plays a ton of zone behind it. And, he's a heavy zone scheme guy. I mean, that's what he's been throughout his career. So I put out a few phone calls today and talked to some Carolina people, and they're really sad to see him leave. He's a leader. A lot of people feel like he was one of the reasons that you saw J.C. Horn really develop well with Carolina. I think if the 49ers right now are on the verge between Diamador Lenore, who's a young corner, Ambry Thomas, who's a young corner, Talanoa Hufanga, who's a young safety, and what they do in this offseason as far as their defensive backfield, adding more young pieces. You need a young defensive backfield teacher with a sound scheme that's proven to be successful and a guy who's kind of proven that he can bring young defensive backs along. The Niners, strength on defense has been up front, but they need to, have a really good defensive backfield coach. They say the 2 toughest positions to handle on a team as far as coordination is the offensive line and the defensive backfield. So what I really love about Wilks is he is a former defensive back. He knows how to develop defensive backfield talent. And also he fits their scheme. They will not be switching from a 4-3, single gap, super aggressive, get up the field scheme to a 3-4 read and react scheme up front. They would have had to change their personnel out largely up front. They don't have a lot of 3-4 linemen. If you look at the 49ers defensive line, it's a lot of one gap penetrators. They don't have those two gappers who control both gaps. So if they had changed their scheme, they would have had to change their personnel. This way, they don't have to change their scheme and they don't have to change their personnel. And they get to keep an aggressive single gap defense under Wilks. He may throw a few more blitzes than D'Amico has used in the past. Time will tell on that. But I just like the fact that this is a guy who's run a 4-3 single gap, get up the field, be hyper aggressive, put pressure on the quarterback kind of a defense. And his expertise is on the back end. Now, the Niners like to mix it up. D'Amico played an assortment of man and zone, and Wilks will as well. But he's basically runs a heavy zone scheme, and that's what the 49ers have run to this point. It's a get up the field, one gap pressure front. It's incredible athleticism at that second level, and then it's a heavy zone scheme behind it, forcing teams to be clean and basically be able to be efficient, moving the ball up and down the field, wait for the offense to make a mistake and fall behind the chains. And then absolutely, when they do fall into a third and long situation, bring the house, bring all kinds of pressure. So I really like this hire. I think this is a guy. I saw the final locker room scene where they gave Steve Wilks the game ball at the end of the Panthers season. And let's be honest, man, the Panthers didn't have a great season. They had to change out their coaching staff. They had a lot of problems with continuity on both sides. They got rid of Matt Rule, and they brought Wilks into a difficult situation. And it was pretty clear that he guided that group, kept them together, and those guys had a real good vibe going at the end of the year. And they were playing for each other, and they were playing fast and physical. So that's the exact thing that the Niners want as well. They want a defense that's going to play fast and physical. They don't want to take a chance with a first-time coordinator. I mean, I like the guy from the Commanders. He's a hot name in the coaching circles, but this hire needed to be an experienced coach, somebody who's done it. D'Amico is very popular with the players. He got the players to play at a breakneck speed. I loved how hard the 49ers played this year. He was a first-time coordinator, but he was a young player. He was a young coach, and it worked. But now replacing him, I think you're going to have to bring somebody into that room that's got some pelts on the wall, somebody who the players will instantly, day one, respect and follow. And Steve Wilks is that guy. He's 53. He's been in the league. He's been in college. He's been a head coach. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's won a couple conference championships. This guy, in a lot of ways, is the perfect hire for the 49ers. So I really like it. He beat the 49ers, as I said, in his first game as a head coach. His scheme is exactly wed to what their scheme is. And his strengths on the back end, with Chris Kosarek's strengths on the defensive line, I think round out the 49er defensive staff. Now it's simply about, trying to perfect and add a couple pieces to the puzzle on defense. I think they need a big run stuffer inside to go with Ridgeway and Kinlaw if those guys are coming back. If they lose Azeez Al-Shaair, they could use some linebacker depth who can run and hit, and they had great depth this year. But there's some really interesting players that I think they can get on day 3 of the draft there. And then on the back end, what do they need? They need another really good, long, rangy corner, preferably a dominant number 1 corner opposite Charvarius, or at least a solid number 2. And I think they could also use a free safety or a strong safety to, or a free safety, I should say, with Hufanga playing the strong safety role, hovering near the line of scrimmage. I think they need a free safety, whether they lose Jimmy Ward or not. I like Jimmy Ward as a nickelback, but I think if they could get another free safety or re-sign Tayshaun Gibson, that would go a great distance. But in taking the 49er defense from where it was last year as the number one in football and keeping it right there. So the draft and free agency are still to come. But as far as, the defensive coordinator position, I think Kyle Shanahan got this one right.